Well, I think Stephanie's here. So let me introduce, but it dawned on me as Cyrus was talking, I have evidently hired a lot of Southerners, which I did not realize until it did not come into the forefront. Because I think Claire is actually from Southern California. Cyrus, as he said, is from Texas. Stephanie is originally from Mississippi. So I guess I'm the northern person. I was born in Chicago and lived in Nebraska. So maybe, well, I don't know. I live in Virginia now. So does that make me a Southerner? No, not really. But Stephanie is our newest public policy person that has joined the National Disability Rights Network. She is less than a year here with us. Before that time, she was with the National Federation of the Blind. And we have brought her on to work on a number of issues. As I mentioned last time when introducing Cyrus, we have, everybody covers lots of issues. Her main focus is voting. And we have a voting access program through the protection and advocacy system. And voting is a critically important thing in large impact, in the largely inaccessible systems for people with disabilities. So we do a lot of voting work. And then she also is doing work around substance use issues, veterans, and sort of something new for us is sort of the intersectionality of disability and Native American issues. One of our programs are one of the few that has a 57th advocacy agency. It's located in the Four Corners region and serves the Hopi, Navajo, and San Juan Southern Paiute nations in that area. But we've never really done a lot of work at our federal level on sort of the intersectionality of disability and Native American. And so Stephanie is focused on that a little bit. And Stephanie is here to sort of describe her experiences. And if I've missed anything on your introduction, Stephanie, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I do have a question. Do Claire and Cyrus actually count as Southerners? Just kidding. Anyway, like Eric said, my name is Stephanie Flynt and I'm from Mississippi. And while I'm pulling up my notes, I do have a couple of controversial opinions to get out of the way. If you don't make your own sweet tea at home, Milo's or McAllister's are the only ways to go. There are no exceptions to this rule. And Hail State, when Mississippi State is playing Alabama, again, I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. But I do go for Alabama, most of the time. Again, controversial opinions. I hope you will still listen to me after these controversial opinions. But yeah, I'm super excited to be here with you guys. Sorry, guys. When the chat goes, Jaws likes to talk. So if Jaws talks over me, I do apologize for that. Also, if for some reason you can't hear me, let me know and I will call in. I've been having some issues with my internet for a little bit this afternoon. And so that's why my camera is not on. So I do apologize for not being on video. Anyway, so I'm going to primarily be talking about various advocacy techniques and kind of, how I've utilized those both in my personal and professional life. And of course, some of my work at NDRN as well. Like Eric said, I primarily work on voting, but I also work on substance use issues. I work on veterans issues, and I also do some work on census issues. So I'm sure when you think of advocacy, you probably think of Capitol Hill, writing a bill, Schoolhouse Rock, maybe even litigation. But my hope, and maybe you're already coming away with this, with the other presentations that you've heard from us and maybe others. I hope that you come away from this event with the understanding that advocacy is so multidimensional and there are so many components. We honestly could probably talk about advocacy itself and its subcomponents and the subcomponents of the subcomponents until the cows come home. But there's, of course, legislative advocacy on the federal, state, and local levels. There's, of course, grassroots advocacy, among other advocacy tools. There's, of course, self-advocacy. But today, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you guys about two advocacy examples one demonstrating some legislative advocacy, and the other that kind of talks a little bit more about a grassroots approach. And I hope that once I get done talking at you, that we can have, a dialogue about just different strategies, different things that, you guys have used to advocate on the federal, state, and local levels. And I hope that we can learn from each other. So when it comes to advocating for my first advocacy example, or just in general, when I'm advocating, particularly when it comes to legislative priorities, I always like to go ahead and give background info, then I'll talk about the problem, then I'll demonstrate the problem if I'm able to do that as well, and then I'll talk about the solution. I know earlier, particularly when Cyrus was speaking about 14C and subminimum wage, I think that he did a great job with giving a background on the issues, to you guys. And then he also demonstrated, of course, the problem that subminimum wage is, and also the problematic arguments that are constantly presented against 14C. And then, of course, the solution, which is eliminating 14C and working through programs and various legislation on the federal level in order to eliminate 14C, which would be the solution. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to present an issue to you guys, and we're going to go ahead and take the PAVA Inclusion Act for an example. Some of you may know what that is, and some of you may not. And that's perfectly okay. It's perfectly okay to be asking your head, what is PAVA? What is HAVA? What are all these acronyms? So that is exactly why the background information when it comes to presenting whatever you're advocating for is so important. So in order for policymakers and congressional staff to understand where I'm coming from, and, in this case, my audience, in talking with you guys, I'm going to go ahead and provide some background information. So I may say something like, in 2002, Congress recognized the obstacles people with disabilities face at the polls, and they passed the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, because who doesn't love another acronym? And included in HAVA was a formula grant known as the Protection and Advocacy for Voting Access, or PAVA. And of course, we love rhyming acronyms, right? And so this program allots funding each year that goes back to the state protection and advocacy systems, or P&As. And this is dedicated funding for work that the P&As can do around voting access. So there's your background. So now that we've talked about the background, we need to present the problem. So here's the problem. Due to a very small but significant, clearly, technicality in the definitions, only 55 P&As out of the 57 P&As are eligible to receive dedicated PAVA funding. So the Native Americans Consortium and the Northern Mariana Islands are unfortunately excluded from receiving PAVA funding due to this interpretation and definition in the bill. And this has been something that they've been excluded going on 20 plus years now. And unfortunately, those two P&As are still excluded. So let's talk about the solution, which is the PAVA Inclusion Act. Super simple here. What we are asking for is to amend HAVA in order to include the other two P&As, so that, and so that's something that we did. And it was introduced in the 116th Congress in the House, and by Representative Gallego. And then in the 117th Congress, we were able to introduce it, and it passed the Senate.
And it's winter, and I didn't close the window and never thought about it until I came back. And They told me that
I'm not sure if anybody is needing to mute themselves or if they have a question. Anyway, as I was saying, so the PAVA Inclusion Act was passed, introduced and passed in the Senate by Senator Lujan of New Mexico. He actually was one of the originating co-sponsors in the House. So we were very fortunate that that happened. And so now, you know, we are currently in the process of, you know, talking trying to get the House's attention, I guess you could say, and encourage them to move this forward, considering that it has unanimously passed in the Senate. So as I like to tell people a lot of the times, the advocacy is never done. And, you know, fortunately for us, this is going relatively quickly, at least knock on wood. I hope it continues to go relatively quickly. But unfortunately, most of the time, legislative advocacy in particular, and of course, other types of advocacy. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of you know this, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but it does not happen overnight. You know, it's not uncommon for initiatives to take years and years and years before they even have a chance at becoming law. You know, there have been times that I've seen various pieces of legislation just, you know, build up support and end up dying at the end of a congressional session, which basically means that you have to introduce it in another congressional session, and then you just go through that whole process again. And then at some point, you know, it may get passed in one chamber, and then you have to reintroduce it in another Congress, and the process continues until finally, you're able to get it through both chambers after a while. And then, you know, the president is able to sign that into law. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about some grassroots advocacy here. And this kind of goes back to the media aspect that we were talking about at the end of Cyrus's presentation. But when I was in college at Mississippi State University, thank you very much, Hail State, a group of individuals were hoping to have an LGBTQIA pride parade in Starkville, Mississippi. And we needed to get a permit in order to do that from the Board of Aldermen. The Board of Aldermen initially denied the group organizing this. And essentially, with that, we, as a group, I wasn't super involved in this, unfortunately. I had a lot of different things going on at that time. But with my small part, you know, I was able to kind of observe the group pulling together all of the stops that they absolutely could. You know, they pulled together litigation, they pulled together the media, and ultimately the media is really what got the Board of Aldermen to back down and actually allow the city to, you know, do various, you know, have patrol around the Pride Parade, various things of that nature. And the media was what ultimately contributed to that. It actually ended up garnering a little bit of national attention. There was an article published in the New York Times. There was an article published in the Washington Post, all because the group ended up going to our local newspaper. And there were even a couple of celebrities that were tweeting out their support for the parade. So you never know. And that's just kind of a demonstration that media can really be something that you can use to your advantage. You know, never underestimate word of mouth. You never know. And so those are kind of more a lot of the examples that I had, particularly with things that, you know, I currently work on a professional level, and of course, things that I participated in as a student in college. But I kind of wanted to go ahead and have a dialogue, and maybe we can just discuss, you know, whatever examples that, you know, you may have, current circumstances where you're working through, what would be the best advocacy strategy for XYZ. So I really just kind of wanted to have an open forum discussion. I know I've been talking at you for probably 15-ish or so minutes, maybe shorter, maybe longer. But with all that being said, I'll go ahead and open the floor.
Hey, Stephanie, just one quick thing. This is Eric. Can you talk about how we sort of make the distinction argument for Democrats and Republicans on the PAVA Inclusion Act?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So regarding that, when it comes to PAVA inclusion, there's been a lot of hesitancy, as there can be when it comes to whatever legislation you're working on. You're always going to have some hesitancy from one side versus the other. And that was something we actually encountered a little bit of that in the Senate, where Republicans were hesitant that it was going to end up costing a whole lot more money in that regard. And so that was one of the concerns that Republicans ended up having about this. And one of the arguments that we continue to make, because Republican offices are, concerned about cost a lot of the times. And so we kept reemphasizing, it doesn't cost anything. It doesn't cost anything. It's not going to cost anything. This is just ensuring that funds that are existing, that are currently going to the 55 PNAs, are going to go to all 57. And so that's just kind of an example of what I would call, making sure that you are appealing to your audience, in this case, Republicans, in that regard. When it comes to that kind of issue. So basically, making sure that your audience and knowing your argument when it comes to that. Eric, I don't know if you want to add anything else that I may have missed, or.
I think the only thing I'd probably add is that we tend to not play the cost card with the Democratic side. That tends to be more of a, here we are protecting their rights. These are individuals that should have their voting rights protected. So it tends to be more of a rights-based discussion when we're talking to Democratic members, and it tends to be more of a cost-based discussion and technical fix. That's a phrase we like to use a lot with the Republican side.
Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate you adding that insight.
I do not see any hands up from anybody, but I'm not always the technological genius on these things.
Likewise, and sometimes Joss likes to, I don't know, sometimes Joss likes to talk over various things. I don't know if, and again, I don't know the capabilities of the Zoom meeting. Despite everything, I'm kind of a technological dinosaur. And so I don't know if people are able to just unmute at all, or if we do have to acknowledge them and unmute them.
Yes, Stephanie, this is Linda. They have that capability. We do ask them to raise their hand or put it in chat, but they can also unmute and ask. And we do have several that have voting as part of their projects that they're going to do for PIPA, for this partners also. So I think maybe they have some questions.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, this dialogue is really whatever, we want it to be, right? I would love to talk with you guys about voting, any questions that you may have, anything in particular that have come up on your projects.
This is Jenny Lux. One of my projects, well, the project that I'm working on with Eric Brown is on voting, especially in rural counties, trying to get transportation and accessibility. started. And teaching not only just the poll workers about different accessibility technology, so when they come across it, that it's okay, but also teaching people with disabilities that it's okay to ask for help, for example.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that, you know, those are things that oftentimes, you know, individuals without disabilities don't necessarily think about. And so I think that that's definitely something that, oh, I think somebody just raised their hand, but I think that is, I really like those ideas. And I like the fact that you're going to, you know, educate these individuals. I feel like that is something that, again, we don't always think about. You know, sometimes our first impulse is to, you know, go and not necessarily, I don't want to call it, you know, just say, hey, you're doing this wrong. Hey, you're doing that wrong. Hey, you're doing this wrong. And I know that's not a super eloquent way of saying it, but I think that, you know, trying to go at it from an educational standpoint can sometimes be a very effective way of advocating. So I really do appreciate you sharing. Let's see, I saw a couple of people raise hands, but it would take a minute to go through the participants list, but I can do that if need be.
Do you guys have a priority of how you order them? Because I can't tell who popped up first. Like I know the one at the top for me is James from ADAP.
Hey, let's go to Eric first, since Jenny just said that she and Eric are working together.
Okay.
I've been creating like a survey for people, people about voting, because it would help people to understand what they put on. Like Jenny and I've been discussing, like creating a survey, like a scale 1 to 5 survey, would help people understand about voting.
Right, and not only help understand about voting, but to establish where the education is lacking, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. What are you gearing the survey towards poll workers or individuals with disabilities, election officials? Are you trying to create a survey for both sides? What's your thinking there?
My name is creating a survey for both sides, because that help I understand what voting is all about.
Awesome. That's a great idea. I really like that idea. I think that sometimes, you know, we forget that not everyone with disabilities is in this space, if that makes any sense. And I think sometimes we don't always realize the full extent of our rights. And so, you know, having a survey to gauge that, and also having a survey to gauge how much the poll workers do or don't know about what they are supposed to do to accommodate individuals with disabilities, and also their legal requirements. Because we do know that a lot of the training has, a lot of the times the training is sadly not up to par with where it needs to be.
Agree.
Yeah, great
Yeah.
points.
And Eric, this is Eric. I love the spelling of your name. I would strongly suggest, if this is going to be like an electronic survey, of having people the ability to click the parts they want to answer. Like if you're a poll worker, click this and it takes you to this set of questions. If you're a person with a disability, click here, it goes to this set of questions. Because one of the problems with surveys at times is that if you have too many questions, it turns people off and they won't do it. And so if you have a survey with like 20 different questions, because you're trying to pick up different things from different people, they may not get through it all. So if you can separate them out and link to them that way electronically, I think that'd be very helpful.
That sounds really good to hear.
That's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that.
And just a general note, and you know, you may have already thought about this, but there are a lot of really good articles about online. And I know this because I had to utilize one of these when I was creating a survey. Gosh, I guess it was like a year ago or so. But there's a lot of there are a lot of really good articles online that basically talk about, you know, how to create a survey that's, that people are willing to take, you know, what the length of the survey should be, how you should, how you should make certain things, choices, and certain things, certain questions, things that people can expand on, just different things like that. And I found those to be very interesting. I wouldn't have even thought to do, at least on my end, research to see what people who've created surveys for years and years and years have learned in their experiences. So just also something to think about as well.
Okay.
And by the way, there is another way to make a survey. Have you ever took on Google form, right? Taught you how to make a survey.
You're looking for a Likert scale with the ratings of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest in terms of opinion. I think it's what you're looking for. I can send you something on that. And you can also go to SurveyMonkey to create your surveys for your questions.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Debbie.
Hey.
Holly.
James, do you still have?
Thanks, Eric. Yeah. Hey, Linda, it's great to see you. It's great to see everybody. I know we're here virtually in April and we were together in Mobile just last month, but it is great to see everybody. So this is James Tucker from ADAP. I think I see that Nikki Watkins is also on here. Since we're talking about voting, I just wanted to say a couple of words if we didn't cover this earlier, Linda. ADAP has a couple of different voting efforts that we are working on. And so I just wanted to share with everyone here some of the work that we are doing. So Eric and his NDRN colleagues have referred to a voting grant that ADAP has. That grant allows us to do a lot of advocacy, but it does not allow us to go to court. So I think Nikki is on here, and I will ask Nikki to say a few words about ADAP's voting advocacy work. Great to see you here today, Nikki. But I also wanted to say that ADAP also has gotten a separate grant so that we can file lawsuits about voting. And we have done that. And in the year 2020, we filed a lawsuit with other partners that went to the US Supreme Court. So we're very involved in voting advocacy. And that ranges from literally Nikki's helping an individual voter figure out how to get registered to vote, or how to make sure your polling place is accessible. So it ranges from individual work to big systemic work, like advocating that the state Secretary of State and Governor and Attorney General make absentee ballots available to all voters during the period when we were in COVID. I'll just close by saying that many states make absentee voting generally available to all voters. Some states are now conducting most of their elections by mail. Unfortunately, in Alabama, broader absentee voting was limited to the period of the height of the COVID pandemic. People may even have seen that some current candidates are making very public statements as part of their campaign to oppose and limit the availability of absentee voting. So it's an example of the way that these issues can play out. And partly, I just wanted to share and let everybody here know, we have a great crowd today of more than 24 people. ADAP wants to support and work with everybody here to continue to advocate on voting issues in any way that you are interested. And as I said, that may be literally an individual phone call. How do I get registered to vote? Or it may be a bigger issue. Let me pause there and ask Nikki if you're here.
I am. Yeah. Hi, James. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nikki Watkins. I'm the voting rights advocate at ADAP, and I work with a voting rights fellow. She's an attorney. Her name is Maddie Ard. Some of you all might know her as well. And we're working together on a couple different projects. One of the things that we've been doing most recently is trying to make sure that at Alabama Department of Mental Health facilities, people can vote who are institutionalized. We've both encountered almost surprise and some, I think, a lot of confusion around who has the right to vote and when and why, and a lot of assumptions are being made about people with disabilities automatically not having the right to vote. So we've been doing a lot of training work with employees of Alabama Department of Mental Health and Bryce Hospital to explain how the law works and that people can vote as long as they have not been declared mentally incompetent by a judge, and it is your obligation to be helping and assisting people vote. So we've done a lot of training around how to assist, since there are ethical and legal obligations that come with that too, right? So we just did a training at the AIR conference in Chaco Springs this week. We had a good crowd and got a lot of good questions about this exact issue. And it's been very enlightening for me to see that a lot of people just don't realize that even if someone has a disability where they struggle to speak, especially an intellectual disability, there are a lot of assumptions made that that person must not want to vote or can't vote. So it's important that we get that word out there. And we're working on creating more trainings and guides for this process. One of the things I'll emphasize that I've run into the most is people struggling to access voter ID. Alabama requires voter ID, and getting a voter ID is simpler than getting a driver's license. But without some assistance, especially for people who struggle to leave their homes or can't leave their homes or don't have anyone to help them, that has been very difficult. So we're talking people through that process and the documents that are required and that kind of thing. The other thing that we are working on doing this year is poll monitoring in Mobile County, especially since it's been some time since the polling places have been monitored there. So we're working on monitoring 10 different locations and writing a report for the Southern District Attorney just to indicate, you know, how many of these places are following ADA guidelines, how many of these places are complying with the ADA checklist, that sort of thing. And this is something I know I certainly want to continue doing and expanding beyond just Alabama Department of Mental Health and Mobile County. But these are just our current projects that we've been working on together. And of course, voting rights training for people in the public and how to get an absentee ballot, how to get an ID. We're going to be doing one early next month on Facebook Live just to kind of show people, you know, this is how you do it. This is, you know, how you can help someone do this. This is where you go to apply for your absentee ballot. and that kind of thing. And we've also worked with other allies in this field, like Alabama Care just did a broadcast yesterday on a lot of these same issues. But I know I speak for myself, and I imagine all of ADAP, we'd love to have partners. So if anybody wants to reach out, I'm going to put my contact information in the chat, and I appreciate James kicking it to me for a few minutes just to give you all my spiel, because I would love to work with each of you on voting rights issues, especially in Alabama, because we know it's an uphill battle here to make sure that our people can vote. So thanks everyone for letting me talk for a few.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that insight.
Thank you.
So are there any particular, and again, I don't know, of course, everything in terms of everything voting wise going on in Alabama, but are there any particular focuses that, you know, all of you as advocates are kind of looking at, or? Eric Brown, I see you have your hand up.
Okay. I'm gonna say it. I've been creating a poster to tell you what you believe in. For example, look at my mom and I been drawing. We're making like an autism society. Because that help people who we are and what our organization is really about.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that, again, you know, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, you know, educating individuals in, you know, some respects, it really can be a form of advocacy and letting people know, you know, about the resources that are available.
That sounds really good.
Stephanie, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the strategies you've seen that have worked over time and some that have not in your advocacy work?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So of course, earlier I talked a little bit about some of the legislative advocacy that we've done, some of the grassroots advocacy that has been done. But regarding just various strategies that have been used that have versus haven't worked, you know, it's one of those things where I've realized that you kind of have to know your situation and what you're advocating for. Basically, what I mean by that is you really have to figure out not just, you know, the issue itself, but also kind of look at what may be best for that issue. You know, for example, maybe going the legislative route when it comes to getting denied Lyft rides because of your service animal. That's not something that could potentially get fixed overnight in the legislative, you know, because of the way that the legislative process works. Not that it could get fixed totally overnight with other things, but maybe that's one of those situations where maybe you try to tweet at the rideshare companies or try to schedule a meeting with someone from those companies or what have you, if you know you're experiencing various issues such as those. So that's kind of those are kind of my thoughts there. I'm trying to think about advocacy strategies that haven't necessarily worked, so to speak. Again, I think that really there are times when you deploy advocacy strategies such as, you know, calling someone out on Twitter and thinking that it might work, and it might not take off the way that you expect it to. So, you know, sometimes it really is a matter of trial and error until you figure out what could work versus what isn't going to work, if that makes sense.
That does to me. Have you noticed a distinction in your disability work from, I mean, I know they both do very good things, but the way sort of the National Federation of the Blind approaches advocacy work versus NDRN?
Yeah, no, that's also a really good question. Actually, can you hear me? Okay, good. You can hear me. Okay, or I think you can. That's a really good question. So one thing that I would say that at the National Federation of the Blind, even in our federal office, we tend to kind of get, or national office, I guess you could say, we tend to get a little bit more involved in our affiliates advocacy work more directly, as opposed to just offering support, similar to kind of what NDRN does, you know, in terms of that. So we do tend to at the National Federation of the Blind get a little bit more involved in that type of way. There's a lot more calling out, I guess you could say, with the National Federation of the Blind as well. Another tactic that has also been deployed by NFB, which to my knowledge, and Eric, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but one thing the National Federation of the Blind has done in the past has been actually going and physically protesting various things that we don't agree with. A couple years back, actually in 2019, there was, and some of you may even be familiar with this show, but there was a show called In the Dark that appeared on the CW, and the trailer depicted someone playing another person, playing someone who was blind. The actor was not blind. And if you watch the trailer, it is quite cringy. The trailer basically shows the actor going up to the front of the line and screaming at the top of her lungs, or may as well be screaming at the top of her lungs, saying, "I'm blind," you know, basically going up to the front of the line, making it clear that she's entitled to go up to the front of the line because she's a blind person. Let's see, there was a feeling her face stereotype. Either way, my point is that's kind of one of the distinctions. We ended up going and protesting outside of the CBS headquarters, headquarters, regarding that, because that was just kind of one of the tactics that we ended up deploying to try to get their attention. So those are kind of some examples that I can think of off the top of my head in terms of how maybe we've done different, deployed different things in terms of advocacy. There are some similarities. We do, NDRN and the National Federation of the Blind have actually worked together on a few issues. I know that, you know, NDRN and the National Federation of the Blind work together on voting things as we see appropriate, among other things. I know that, of course, we both do coalition work. We both are very active on the federal legislative front as well. And so those are just some of the ways that just some of the similarities and some of the ways that, you know, that you can use to demonstrate that coalitions can also play a pretty big role in the advocacy space. as well. So just kind of going over those similarities and differences. So it's really interesting to kind of see how that works. And it's also interesting to see, you know, at least with my work with the National Federation of the Blind, how one affiliate may do something completely different in terms of advocacy versus what another affiliate would do. And I would imagine the same would be true of the PNA network. But Eric, of course, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that front. Or
I was laughing because no, it is 57 different entities doing it slightly different ways.
yes.
Does anyone have any questions for Stephanie?